Better Preach, Episode 80, Solving the Biggest Rookie Mistake. Welcome to Better Preach, a podcast for Catholic leaders on developing and delivering great Catholic talks. I'm your host, Ryan O'Hara, a podcaster, speaker, and consultant, and I'm so excited to join you on your journey of communicating the true, the good, and the beautiful. So I've got just the thing for you. If you want to look like a prideful, unprofessional punk when you speak, here's exactly what you do. You blow right through the allotted time that you have been given to speak to that Catholic audience. You ignore the fact that you obliterated the expectations there, and make sure not to apologize, and make sure not to change the next time that you speak. Now, again, this sounds absurd. Who wants to be that prideful, unprofessional punk? Nobody. But this is one of the biggest rookie mistakes that I made repeatedly for too long. And that's where all of the stories kind of come from today. A lot of the examples and perhaps lessons, I hope, that come today. I want to talk about why does this happen? Because this is all too common. Why does it matter? And what we can do about it to finish on time or even early, God forbid. So this is one of the biggest rookie mistakes that inexperienced and experienced speakers make, and I don't want you to fall into that same trap. So before we get started, would love to hear your thoughts on the show. Please reach out on Apple Podcast or Spotify with a rating and written review, or on my website, ryanohara.org/betterpreach. There's a contact form there. Makes my day. It sends me a little email. I get to hear from you, and I would love to hear from you. What can we do to make this show better? What is it that you appreciate about the show? Just would love to be in contact. Speaking of contact, a great way to connect is on Instagram at Better Preach. Would love to see you there too. Let's get into it. Okay, prideful and unprofessional. These are the two kind of adjectives that I would use to describe those who repeatedly blow through the amount of time that they're given to speak. Hey, we need you to give a 20-minute talk. It's 35 minutes. Hey, we need you to give an 8-minute sharing. It's 22 minutes. Whatever it might be, where it's not just, I'm not talking about just, I'm a minute or two over, although we need to look at that. It's more that you're really just kind of blowing through the amount of time, that you're entrusted with. 5 minutes over, 10 minutes over, 15 minutes over. Is this a problem that you struggle with? I know for me that this was one of the biggest bad habits that it took me a while to really overcome. And I want to talk about that today. Why is it that this happens? Why does it matter? Like, what's at stake? And what can we do about it to make sure that we end on time or maybe even a little bit early? Okay, so why does this happen? I want to share 5 reasons why I think this is the case. The first one is that there's a lack of communication. You haven't gotten clear with the person maybe who is bringing you in or with the organizer of the event how much time you have, or if there's a drop dead time that your talk must be done. Again, I put this on you, the speaker, that it's really your job to make sure you're clear about the content, you're clear about the goals of the talk and of the event, and then also how much time is it that you have, or if there is a time that you must be done. So often it happens that someone plans on you having, say, 30 minutes for a talk, but the event is running behind for some other reasons. You need to clarify, again, before you get up there, do I still have 30 minutes, or is there a certain time that I need to make sure that I'm ending? And so this is the number one reason why I think we blow through the time that we've been given, is there is a lack of clear communication around expectations for time. And in that same piece, part of the communication that really helps me to make sure that I'm hitting the marks as far as timing goes is that I'm aware of what's coming next. I'm aware that there is a prayer time or a small group time or a testimony that may follow a talk. Because again, what happens if I blow through the end of my allotted time? What happens to that testimony? What happens to the small group? And what do we do with, the length of prayer time? And that shortchanges those other important elements. So number one, we've got to shore up that lack of communication, both in terms of how much time I have or when the talk has to be done, but also the context of what's coming next to make sure that the talk is setting that up well. So that's the first reason why this happens, because of lack of communication. The second reason is that as speakers, our eyes are often bigger than our stomachs. And what I mean by that is that we bring 10 pages of notes to a 10-minute talk. There's just way too much food prepared for how much time we have to eat it, if you will. So you have to know, how much material do I need to prepare for a 10-minute talk, a 20-minute talk, a 30-minute talk, or even, say, a 40-minute talk or longer? Can you match your material preparation with the amount of time that's been given? For me, I've kind of got it down, having given hundreds of talks over the years. Every page of speaker notes that I have is 10 minutes. So if I have 3 pages, that's 30 minutes. Even if it's 2.5 pages, that's about 25 minutes. So if I bring 5 pages to a 30-minute talk, I'm lying to myself, and I'm lying to the audience. I'm lying to, the venue who is hiring me. Invariably, if I don't cut, I'm going to go past, that 30-minute time. So we need to make sure that our eyes are not bigger than our stomachs, and that what we've prepared really does fit into the amount of time allotted. So that's the second reason. Our eyes are bigger than our stomach. The third reason is that you literally lose track of time. You forget that this is an element that you have to pay attention to, just like you're paying attention to your content and where it's going and the points that you're making. You're paying attention to the audience and their body language and the feedback that they're giving you. And of course, you're adjusting based on that. You also are keeping track of time. And so often we kind of get lost in the stories that we're telling. And sometimes it happens that we suddenly realize that we've gotten through only about a half of the talk, and we've got just about 3 or 4 minutes left in the talk. And so in that moment, what do we do when we realize we've kind of lost track? I would suggest making a mental note and quickly find yourself back onto the path. I don't suggest bringing the audience into it necessarily. I would suggest not drawing attention to it, not distracting others because of kind of your mismanagement of the time, but having a way to begin to make that safe landing. The fourth reason is that you add material to the talk, usually in the middle of the talk, and you don't subtract. So you're giving a talk and you get inspired. There's a particular pivot you make. You tell another story. You add this tangent there. And before you know it, you've added 8 to 10 minutes to the talk. Well, have you subtracted 8 to 10 minutes? And so you have to make some adjustments, especially if you haven't given yourself very much wiggle room. And so if you're going to add material, especially during the talk, you have to be mindful of that and then make the subsequent adjustments before the end of the talk so that you can make that safe landing. So often I've seen people get, planes on the ground, but it's more like a crash, and they kind of declare, oh my gosh, I got to finish this up. Oh, quick, let me blow through these last few points. And again, that's more of a crash landing than a safe landing. So we have to find ways, if we add material, to naturally then subtract, or to move the talk along a little bit more quickly in terms of pacing, after that point of adding new material. So that's the fourth reason. And the last reason, and this is something that happens more often than we realize, or at least it goes unaddressed, is that the person who consistently blows through the amount of time they've been given, they haven't been given helpful feedback. And so the feedback that they may give is they may not be invited back, say regularly to that same opportunity. But I think it's really important for folks who are hiring others to bring them in to give talks, to make sure that you give that feedback to the presenters. How it worked with their management of time. Were they successful in managing the time that was allotted? And if they weren't, please do give that feedback, because so often we can kind of assume, let's say we do blow through the amount of time and there wasn't much else planned. And it seemed like, well, it was okay. I went an extra 15 minutes. Well, that's okay if it is okay. But if that was disruptive to the event, the person who's giving the talk really needs that feedback. So these are the 5 reasons that I think it happens. I'd be curious to hear your feedback. Why else do you think it happens that people kind of blow through the allotted time? I think it stems from a lack of communication, that our eyes are bigger than our stomachs, that people literally lose track of time, that they add material and don't subtract. And finally, speakers aren't getting good, honest feedback about how their management of time worked with the event or not. Okay, so that's why it happens. But I want to talk about why it matters. And I think about it in 4 very simple ways, that there's 4 relationships that are honored when we manage our allotted time well as speakers. Number 1, it honors the team that brought you in. I think it's a great way to show that you are trustworthy with that stewardship of their event, of that moment that they had planned and prepared for. And I think it's a great way, one of the best ways, one of the first ways that I hope that you would honor those folks who bring you in, is that you would work within the allotted time that they give you. The second is, I think it honors the audience. If you think about it, it's an amazing trust that here I am, the one with the microphone, and there's 50 people, 100 people, 500 people sitting quietly listening. This is an incredible moment. I cannot believe the privilege of a moment quite like that. And so when you start to think about it, let's do the math. Let's say there were 200 people showing up for a 40-minute parish mission talk. Well, this is going to happen for me this next week. That's 200 people times 40. That's 8,000 minutes of attention that's given to me. That's in one talk. That's 5.5 days worth of attention. That's incredible. And so there's a stewardship there of honoring the audience, that this is what they expected, and I'm going to fill this time with as much value as possible and not go over, that expectation. So it honors the team that invited you. It honors the audience. It honors the Lord. Let's be honest too. It is a way of stewarding the gospel message with great care and great intentionality, but also acknowledging the fact that I'm a creature, that I'm a limited resource, that Jesus is the one who is doing the work, and the Holy Spirit is the principal evangelist. I don't need to go 1, 2, 5, 10 minutes over for the sake of anybody's salvation. Jesus can handle it. And it really helps me to be able to put the mic down, knowing that I've done what I'm supposed to do and no more. And really, it's a sign of entrusting myself to the work of God in the midst of Catholic speaking, but also in no way to overinflate my role as well. So it honors the team that hired you, the audience who is listening to you. It honors the Lord of whom you are his ambassador. And finally, it's a way of honoring yourself. It's a way of having integrity. And I think there's a truth telling that happens when you do what you say that you'll do, regardless of how the Spirit was leading you and moving you to do this or moving you to do that. That all has to happen within a context of an event that you're simply helping to steward for others. And so in this, you had integrity and you followed through on your commitments. You did what you said that you would do. And so it's a way to honor yourself as well. And so that's why I think it matters. It matters to each of those people who are connected to that talk, the team, the audience, the Lord, and even yourself. So lastly, I want to talk about what is it that you can do to make sure that you end on time or even earlier. I've got 4 things, and it's similar to the kinds of things that we talked about. Why does it happen? Well, the first thing that you need to do, number 1, you've got to get clear. How much time do I have? I always note how much time I have, but also what the drop dead time is. When do I have to ensure that the talk is over? And I write it on the bottom of my last page of notes, drop dead in all caps. And I put a blank space, and then I go talk to the person who's leading the night. What's my drop dead? And I write down in big numbers my drop dead time. And so why that's so important is that oftentimes in these spiritual settings, you may have 30 minutes that you've been told, but there's only 20 minutes left until your drop dead time. I choose to talk to people even right before I go up and say, is it still okay if I'm using 30 minutes? Or would you like me to make this 20 minutes because that gets us at our drop dead time? And then they'll clarify. They'll say, you can go 5 minutes over max. Fine. Or no, let's stick with the drop dead times. So again, be clear about how much time you have, but always relative to the drop dead time. Number 2, you've got to know yourself. You've got to know yourself that based on what you've prepared going into the talk, how long do you think that talk is? And is your tendency to go shorter than what you've prepared? Or is your tendency to go longer once you go live? Again, it's not so often that our practice, perfectly imitates kind of game time. There's all sorts of different realities. When you're speaking to an audience of say 500 or more, there is audience interaction, there's laughter, there's more pauses that you have to account for. That would be very different than say a smaller group. And certainly that'd be very different than just you practicing on your own or with 1 or 2 people. So the second thing is know yourself. Know what your tendencies are between going from practice to game time. Do your talks tend to expand or do they tend to shrink? Interestingly enough, I just talked to someone recently and they pointed that out. They said, I actually tend to speed up when I'm talking live, and I find myself working more quickly through the material. So not only do I get more words in per minute, but I move more quickly in my transitions. And I just thought that was really interesting. I tend to go longer, and this person tended to go shorter. So again, that's why I would say my recommendation is to know yourself and the difference between you as the one who practices talks and you who give those same talks. What's the difference? The third thing that you can do about it is to know your landing spot. And if you know your landing spot, you know where you're going, you know kind of how the talk ends. Sometimes you'll have to build kind of a bridge to that landing spot from some places that you perhaps didn't prepare for. But if you know your landing spot well, you can hopefully find your way to that. And then lastly, and this is probably the most obvious, is have a clear plan to track the time. I think there's only so many ways you can do it. So the number one is I always look, is there a clock in my line of sight? And usually it's some kind of big analog wall clock. But sometimes there's a digital clock or there's a monitor that shows you the amount of time that you have left. That's great when that happens. It's often not the case. Second is have somebody keep track of time. if you don't have a wall clock or another way to keep track of time, assign somebody to keep track of time and let them know what signals it is that you want from them. And if you're going to have them put some signals up, make sure that you're looking at them, as well. So 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then give them permission to say, like, if it's time to wrap up, that they give you some kind of signal, like, get off the stage. And so whether it's a clock within your line of sight, if it's a person that you're saying, hey, would you keep track of time for me? Or finally, what I use is I use an app on my phone. So I bring the phone up with me. In fact, just recently, I've been searching for a great presentation timer. And I want to kind of brag about this particular presentation timer called Prezi Timer, Presi Timer, Presi Timer, Prezi Timer. And it's free and it's easy to use and it does all the things that I want it to do. It doesn't have any ads. It allows me just to set the amount of time that I want to keep track of, and it counts all the way down. And then when it gets to 0, it starts to count back up so I can see how much time I've gone over. And it could use sounds, but you can turn off the sounds so it doesn't make any noises. And it's really simple and intuitive. I've used a bunch of different ones over the years, but this one is by far and away the best one. It's called Prezi Timer. In fact, I'll put a link in the show notes to this particular app. So that's the app I'd recommend. I wonder, what do you use to keep track of time? I would love to know what your solution is. And I'd love to know how you would add to this conversation. Why does this happen? Why do you think it matters that we honor the amount of time that we're given? And what do you do to keep track of time? I would love to know your thoughts. At the end of the day, I think this is on us as speakers to really own this, to work on always hitting the expectation of those folks who have entrusted their audience to us, and for us to always end on time, or by God's grace, let's end early. I don't ever hear anybody complaining about that. It is such a joy to walk with you in this podcast. So grateful. You have millions of choices when you podcast. Thanks for press and play today. I will see you next week. God bless.